the Senate bill. The House put it on. A totally unrelated provision dealing with the National Mediation Board that isn't even a part of the FAA and which isn't in the jurisdiction of the two relevant committees.
Senator Harkin of Iowa. Congressman Weka, what's your response to that?
Well, the House did pass a different version. You know, the Obama administration changed 70 years of labor.
I ask consent to call the quorum be dispensed with.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, I see the distinguished senator from Oklahoma, and I know he's waiting to go, and appreciate his courtesy that I might go first. President, let me speak in my capacity as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee. 2 weeks ago, when the Senate confirmed only one of the 19 judicial nominations, which were delayed from last year when the Republican leader decided block votes on them last year, I urged Senate Republicans to join with Senate Democrats and take long overdue steps to remedy the serious vacancies crises on federal courts throughout the country. Nearly 1 out of every 10 federal judgeships is vacant throughout the country. That means that people who have to depend on the federal courts, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, they've got at least a 10% chance of finding a vacancy in the court they want to go to. But nonetheless, I'm concerned that Senate Republicans are refusing to consent to votes on consensus nominees who could fill many of those vacancies without further delay. These are nominees who have been supported by every Republican and every Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, supported by the senators in their home states, Democrats and Republicans. There are well-qualified judicial nominees who were reported unanimously by the Judiciary Committee many months ago, and there's been no explanation why they're being delayed. In my 37 years here in the Senate, I have never seen anything like this. During the last 2 months, Senate Republicans have consented to vote on only 2 of the 23 judicial nominees that are out of the committee ready for final Senate action. Of the 19 judicial nominations now awaiting a final vote by the Senate, 16 were reported by the Judiciary Committee with the support of every senator on the committee, Democratic and Republican. No senator can or should have any reason to oppose these nominees in the Senate. In the past, they never did, when you had nominees that were reported unanimously. But month after month and year after year, Senate Republicans have found new reasons and new tactics to delay confirmation of consensus judicial nominees for no good reason. As I said, I've never seen anything like this, certainly not in 37 years here. These delays are a disservice to the American people. They prevent the Senate from fulfilling its constitutional duty. But they're damaging to the ability of our federal courts to provide justice to all Americans around the country. And regrettably, the last 2 weeks' evidence of more of the same, a continuation of the delaying tactics we've seen for years as Senate Republicans continue their across-the-board obstruction of President Obama's judicial nominations. By nearly any measure, we are well behind where we should be. 3 years into President Obama's first term, the Senate has confirmed a lower percentage of President Obama's judicial nominees than those of any president in the last 35 years. The Senate has confirmed just over 70% of President Obama's circuit and district nominees. More than 1 in 4 are not confirmed. That is stark contrast to nearly 87% of President George W. Bush's nominees who are confirmed, nearly 9 out of every 10 nominees he sent to the Senate. In fact, we remain well behind the pace set by the Senate during President Bush's first term. By this date in President Bush's first term, The Senate confirmed 170 Federal Circuit and District Court nominations, on the way to 205, and lowered judicial vacancies to 46. By the time Americans went to the polls in November 2004, we'd reduced vacancies to 28 nationwide, the lowest level in the last 20 years. In contrast, the Senate's confirmed only 125 of President Obama's district and circuit nominees. The judicial vacancy remained over 85. The vacancy rate is double what it was at this point in the Bush administration. And I'd remind my colleagues of something. In the first 48 months of President George W. Bush's term, Republicans were in charge of the Senate for 31 of those months, Democrats for 17 of those months. During the 17 months that the Democrats were in charge, during President Bush's first term, I was chair. We confirmed 100 of President Bush's nominees. The Republicans worked hard, and their 31 months they were in charge, they confirmed more. They confirmed 101. We did 117 months, and I did this notwithstanding the fact that Republicans had pocket filibustered 60 of President Clinton's nominees in the few years before that. I wanted to change that attitude, started moving judges. So in 17 months, I think I became chairman in July. Up to that time, the Republicans had not held a single confirmation hearing on President Bush's nominees. I quickly moved 100 of them. I wonder when I hear some Republican senators claim credit for progress on nominations. This is not progress. They point to what they call positive action. This is not positive action. It means you have to ignore the 19 judicial nominations being blocked for no reason. I wonder how they can claim progress for the American people when judicial vacancies remain well above 80, now more than 3 years into President Obama's first term. And in this setting, after years of delay and lack of real progress, it's troubling to hear Senate Republicans already talking about how they plan to resort to the Strom-Thurmond rule to shut down all judicial confirmations for the rest of the year. Their obstruction has already resulted in the Senate having confirmed 45 fewer judicial nominations after 3 years of the Obama administration than after 3 years in the Bush administration. So we have a long way to go to catch up in the lower judicial vacancies, a long way to go to catch up to the pace we established during a Republican president's administration. So I wish, as I said earlier, the Republicans would abandon their rhetoric and do as Senate Democrats would do. We worked to confirm 100 of President Bush's judicial nominees in 17 months. 100 in 17 months. In fact, we continue to work to reduce judicial vacancies by considering and confirming President Bush's judicial nominations late into the presidential election years of 2004 and 2008. We reduced the vacancy rates in those years to their lowest levels in decades. This kind of obstruction, the costs are borne by the American people. More than half of all Americans, nearly 160 million, live in districts or circuits that have a judicial vacancy. Emphasize that again. Nearly 160 million Americans live in districts or circuits that have a judicial vacancy, and they can be filled today, this morning. Senate Republicans just agreed to vote in the nominations and be reported favorably by the Judiciary Committee. The irony, Mr. President, if those nominees could be brought up for a vote, they'd probably get it'd probably be 100 to nothing vote on all or most of them. So I think it's wrong to delay votes on these qualified consensus judicial nominees. The Republican obstruction began long before President Obama's recess appointment of a handful of executive branch nominees needed for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and the National Labor Relations Board to function. The fact that if people honestly are concerned by those recess appointments, there's a simple way out of it. Agree if the President renominates them, we'll have a vote up or down within 2 weeks. Actually, if that meant the American people would see us doing what we're paid to do, vote yes or no, not maybe. When you block something from coming to vote, you're voting maybe. You know, actually, despite these 3 years of delays and across-the-board obstruction of his judicial nominees, President Obama has not recessed appointed a single judicial nominee. President Bush did, but not President Obama. In fact, Senate Democrats that year consented to consider non-controversial judicial nominations, confirming a total of 205, we're talking about when President Bush was here, confirmed a total of 205 circuit and district court nominations. President Bush's first term, we lowered the judicial vacancies dramatically. Now, when you have Senate Republicans blocking votes on 18 of the President's judicial nominees since last year, eight of the judicial nominations Republicans are blocking were reported unanimously by the Judiciary Committee in September and October of last year. Another 5 nominations were reported in November, 4 in December. All of these could and should have been considered by the Senate last year. But let's vote them up or down now, today. Could easily do that. I suspect most would not even require a roll call vote. You know, when Republicans held up scores of nominees in December, and again, keep in mind, many of these are in judicial vacancy courts where all the people within those jurisdictions, Republicans and Democrats, are being damaged by this obstruction. They said they were doing this to punish the administration for not assuring them that the President would not use his recess appointment power. So we had this delay of more than 2 months, somehow taking revenge on our judicial courts, our federal judiciary. The judiciary has always been thought of as being outside of politics. Let's stop playing politics with the federal judiciary. This hurts the country by engaging in more obstruction, delay now to seek a double measure retaliation. You know, instead of exacerbating the conflict and this destructive conflict that's hurting the federal courts so much, Senate Republicans should reconsider their tactics, moderate their use of filibusters and stalling. The President has reached out to work with senators from both parties with respect to judicial nominations. Every one of the 19 judicial nominations awaiting final Senate action has the support of his or her home state senators, Republican as well as Democratic. So there's no excuse for continued stalling of President Obama's consensus judicial nominees. Courts in the country can't afford another year of across-the-board delays for President Obama's judicial nominations. Mr. President, I think as senators know, I've worked with both Republicans and Democrats to help them get their nominees through. And they've come to me and said they had a nominee they wanted to get through from their state. We've done it. It's a sorry precedent not only for the Senate, but a real destructive one for our federal judiciary, an independent federal judiciary, model really of the rest of the world. If we continue playing partisan ping pong with our federal judiciary. President, I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma. Mr. President, I see the junior senator from Connecticut here. If he'd like to speak, it's my understanding this is Democrat time now. If he'd like to go before me, that is perfectly all right. And then I would ask unanimous consent at the conclusion of his remarks that I be recognized as if in morning business, because I do want to talk about the transportation bill that's coming up.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
Senator from Connecticut.
I thank the distinguished senator from Oklahoma for his courtesy and his leadership on so many issues. And I want to particularly say to my colleague from Vermont how much I appreciate his leadership of the Judiciary Committee where I serve. And leadership really is the mark of his work there. He brings together members of both parties on so many issues, including this one involving the federal judiciary. And it is, as he has said so eloquently, one of the marvels of the world, one of the historic accomplishments of our republic and democracy, that we have a truly independent judiciary that exemplifies the qualities of professionalism and scholarship and integrity and, yes, independence. We are here today because we have a crisis in our judiciary. It is a crisis not created by our judges, but by this body. It is a judicial vacancy crisis because nearly 1 out of 10, I repeat, 1 out of 10 judgeships in this country is now vacant. The vacancies are double what they were at this point in President Bush's first term. And every time I go back to Connecticut, as I'm sure happens to the President in his state of West Virginia and to Senator Inhofe in Oklahoma, people ask me, why can't you do better in Washington? Why can't you bring both parties together and avoid the waste and the acrimony and the rancor and the gridlock that is the reason for this judicial vacancy crisis? We need to come together and avoid the kind of paralysis that has such lasting and damaging effects on our judiciary. The President has done his work in recommending qualified nominees to this body. The Judiciary Committee has done its work in reporting many of these judicial nominees to the floor, in many cases with unanimous support. Despite that unanimous support, those nominations languish here. As we speak, 19 judicial nominations are still pending on the Senate's executive calendar. 16 of those nominations were reported unanimously to the floor, and all but 2 of them are consensus nominees that received strong bipartisan support in the Judiciary Committee. They have been blocked by the Republican minority. They have been blocked by up or down votes. They have been denied those up or down votes. And that is unfair not only to them, but to the American people. It is damaging to this country. It undermines the independence of the judiciary, its credibility and respect. It causes delays in the decisions on cases that vitally affect ordinary men and women who come to our federal courts for justice. And the old saying, justice delayed is justice denied, holds true whether it is the great historic cases of this country or the ordinary, mundane, routine cases that involve injuries to individual plaintiffs or defendants. And it discourages qualified people from permitting their names to be placed in nomination. The uncertainty of those delays, the need to put their lives on hold when they are lawyers in private practice or judges serving on the bench now, causes a severe disincentive that deters qualified people from beginning this uncertain process. Outside of Washington, there's a clear consensus that the Senate must do better. Outside of the Senate, there's a clear consensus that we need bipartisan cooperation, not just among politically elected leaders, but the Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, members of the bar on both sides of the aisle, all agree that we must move these nominations. And so I call on my colleagues, as the chairman of the Judiciary Committee has just done, to do better. President Obama has nominated qualified members of the bar to serve on our district courts, including most recently Michael Shea of my state, to replace Judge Droney, who has just been confirmed as a member of the Court of Appeals. Now, Judge Droney's nomination waited here on the Senate calendar for 130 days, despite the clear consensus in his favor, and eventually he was confirmed by a vote of 88-0. That delay, in turn, caused a delay in the nomination of a district court judge to replace him. I am hopeful that Michael Shea will be confirmed expeditiously. We should never minimize the importance of careful vetting and scrutiny when it comes to these nominees. But once that process is complete in the Judiciary Committee, blocking these nominees can only be bad for the American people, as well as for the 160 million Americans who live in districts and circuits with vacancies whose nominees are sitting on the Senate calendar. They should not have their ability to access justice denied or delayed. We should reduce the burdens on our courts as quickly as possible so that our system of justice will continue to be, and justifiably regarded as, one of the great marvels in the history of democracy, of governance in this world, on this planet. Our nominees deserve prompt and fair consideration by the full Senate, and I am hopeful that the United States Senate will do better. Thank you, and I yield the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, we are going to be considering today, and I think the rest of this week, and probably go into next week, one of the most significant things that we're supposed to be doing here. And I'd like to start off by saying that in endorsing and encouraging a highway reauthorization bill, I want people to know this is coming from someone who is a conservative. I think there are a lot of conservative organizations out there that have mistakenly thought of this as being a big spending bill without realizing that this has been, since it was in its inception back during the Eisenhower administration, an approach to build roads, highways, infrastructure that is necessary in this country, and to have that as a top priority. Now, there's some problems that have come up with the Highway Trust Fund, and I want to share that with my colleagues. But first of all, make sure that everyone knows who might be watching, and particularly some of the organizations that are conservative organizations, that these words are coming from me. I have probably been recognized as the most conservative member of this body, as much as anybody else has, maybe more. And yet I've always said, even though I am a leading conservative, there are two areas where I am a big spender. One is in national defense, and one is in our infrastructure. And for that reason, I say to the chair that when I was first elected back in 1994, I selected two committees to be on. One is the Armed Services Committee, where I could try to keep a strong national defense, and the other was the Environment and Public Works Committee. I am now the second-ranking member in the Armed Services and the ranking member of the Environment and Public Works Committee. Now, back when Republicans were a majority, I was actually the chairman of that committee. And that's when we did our last bill. Our last bill that we did, Highway Authorization Bill, was 2005. It was one that went through the process and was very successful. And conservatives, liberals alike joined in and said, this is a major function of America. This is what we're supposed to be doing here. A strong defense in our infrastructure system is one that's not going to be done by anybody else. It's going to have to be done by us. If we want to make sure that we maintain, which this president has not been doing, a strong national defense with the cuts that he's made. Actually, we could have as much as $1 trillion in cut in our defense budget over the next 10 years, all due, quite frankly, to one person, that's President Obama. So he doesn't really care that much about defending America, but in putting your resources there. And here's a president that in his own budget has proposed a deficit each year for 4 budgets of over $1 trillion each year. Now, you would think with these huge deficits that we wouldn't be having a problem in defense spending as well as in our roads and highways, and coming up with a bill that would be a transportation reauthorization bill. The transportation reauthorization bill of 2005, where I was the sponsor of it because I was chairman of the committee, was a $286.4 billion bill. It was one that even at that time just barely maintained what is out there already. And certainly I don't have to tell the occupier of the chair from West Virginia that I've been through his state and there's a lot of room for improvements in the road system, and I know that he is a strong supporter of this. But this is certainly in my state of Oklahoma. It happens that my state of Oklahoma is tied, last time I checked, with Missouri, dead last in the quality of our bridges. And we have actually had deaths in Oklahoma. We had a lady not too long ago in Oklahoma City. She's the mother of 3 small children, was driving, and a chunk of concrete came off a bridge and killed her. I mean, this is serious stuff, you guys, and this is what we're supposed to be doing here. So we had this bill back in 2005. Now, since that time, we've been operating on extensions. We've done 8 extensions, and it's kind of complicated, but I want to explain how this works. If you are relying upon the Highway Trust Fund, the proceeds of the Highway Trust Fund, they come from the gas tax, about 18 cents when you buy gas at the pump, goes to maintenance of the highways and bridges and that program. The problem has been that in recent years, it started about 10 years ago, that we had surpluses in the Highway Trust Fund. And so other people would want to get their deal in on the Highway Trust Fund. So we have things that have nothing to do with transportation that are there. That's one of the problems that we have. But the other problem we have is that through the efforts to encourage people to use electric cars and better mileage and all that, we don't have the proceeds that we have had in the years past. I think probably if we'd been smart initially, we would have had the Highway Trust Fund funded by a percentage as opposed to a centage. If it's 18 cents, it doesn't make any difference. It's going to be 18 cents. But if the price of fuel goes up, if it had been a percentage, then we wouldn't be faced in the situation that we're in today. So that's what we have, and I applaud, I thank the Senator Harry Reid, the leader of the Senate, for wanting to give it the attention, the priority, and getting it on the floor so we can talk about it. In a minute, I'll also be very complimentary of Senator Boxer from California. This is something that's kind of interesting, that's unique, really, in transportation only. Here I am ranked always in the top 3 most conservative members. Senator Boxer from California is a very proud liberal. You know, one thing I don't mind people being liberals if they're proud liberals and admit it. Well, she does. She is a liberal. She feels that government should have greater controls in some of the things we do. Consequently, she's doing essentially the same thing as the current chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee as I would be doing if I had been still chairman of the Environment and Public Works Committee. And that is coming up with a highway bill. But we're looking at it right now, and I have to share with my colleagues on the right, the Republicans, the conservatives, of what we're looking at. A lot of people don't realize that the bill that is coming up is a bill of compromise. We actually passed this in the Senate and of course, out of the Senate committee unanimously, and all the Republicans and the Democrats all voted for it. And it was a bill because I have to say that Senator Boxer worked very closely with us. We have reforms in here. Now, going back to my comment about extensions, if we don't pass a bill, we have to operate on extending the current legislation, the current bill, or the remnants, I might say, of the 2005 Transportation Reauthorization Bill. Now, if we do that, you don't get any reforms. So one of the things that we did in this bill that gained the support of the Republicans on the committee and most of the Republicans here were the reforms that we have. For example, we gave in this bill, the bill that's up for consideration now, more flexibility to the states. I have long believed, and I served many years ago in the state legislature, the closer you get to home, the more responsible government is. And I can tell you right now, giving the flexibility to the states to make these determinations, who are we to say that we, in our infinite wisdom and knowledge in Washington, D.C., are smarter than they are at the state level? We're not. And certainly we don't know the needs like the states know the needs. So we have this situation where we are now giving, in this legislation, we are giving more flexibility to the states. We're reducing the number of programs. This is a big thing. I can't tell you exactly how many programs there are because I don't have that in my notes, but I do know that we have reduced the number by eliminating and consolidating programs that might be duplicative of each other by 2/3. In other words, we only have 1/3 of the programs that we had before. That's in this bill. That's a major, major improvement in it. And looking also at the streamlining of project delivery, we have a thing called NEPA. NEPA looks after the environmental concerns when you're building roads and bridges, and this bill expands the number of categorical exclusions available under NEPA and allows for steps within the lengthy NEPA process to be combined so we can get things done. You've heard the stories. I'm sure you have. Problems with everything from endangered species to other environmental concerns that cause these things to drag on and on and on, and the expense is so much greater. Well, we're eliminating a lot of those categorical exclusions. We're increasing the number so that we will be able to get that much more done. We have another thing that is in this law, and this is very complicated. It's called enhancements. I opposed back years ago when they started putting enhancements on the highway bill. I've always said that it's a moral issue. When people pay their 18.4 cents a gallon and it goes into the Highway Trust Fund, they are led to believe that that money is going to be going to transportation, to improving the roads and the bridges. That's not quite true because the other deals have kind of moved in so that they're involved with it, and they passed this thing called enhancements where 2% of the total highway funding would have to go to what they call transportation enhancements. Now, a lot of people say 10%. It's 10% of the state's surface transportation program funding or 2% of the total highway funding. Now, I would like to do away with the enhancements program altogether. And unfortunately, that means we couldn't get a highway bill. Working with Senator Boxer and with the Democrats in the committee, we came up with the perfect solution. You don't have to eliminate enhancements because the solution under this will allow the states to make the determination of how they're going to spend that 2% of their total highway funding. Instead of doing it for museums and other things that have nothing to do with transportation, you are, under the provisions of this bill that we're talking about, you're able to use that money for any other requirements, for unfunded mandates, and there are plenty of them there, such as endangered species mitigation, stormwater runoff, wetlands mitigation. They're a part of every project. So you can take that 2%, instead of apply it to enhancements, you can offset the requirements that are there. So for all practical purposes, like in my state of Oklahoma, we're not going to have any of that 2% for enhancements. It's not there. We've solved the problem, but we put that in the hands of states. And so there will be amendments that would be wanting to do away with enhancements. I would say you don't have to do that now because we've reformed that process. It is a little bit complicated because you're merely saying that you have a block of money which constitutes 2% of the total highway funding, and instead of that going to things that you hear about that have nothing to do with transportation, you don't have to do that anymore. That'll be up to your state. However, some states might feel differently, and if they do, that's their problem. It's not my problem. So that's the type of thing that we are doing in this bill that hasn't been there before. Now, if we don't do it, we'd be cutting highway spending down to the Highway Trust Fund receipts. That would be it calculates into a 34% cut to the state's road and bridge funding. Now, right now, to put this into perspective so that people will hopefully understand, will hopefully listen, we need, and we are in the process of getting an additional $7.2 billion in order to be able to fund this bill as we passed it. $7.2 billion. Now stop and think about that. If you go back to the $800 billion stimulus bill that President Obama had, I know that Senator Boxer agreed with me. More of that should have gone to highway funding. Only 3% of it, 3% went to highway funding. So the money, you're talking about $800 billion was spent. We're trying to come up with $7.2 billion. And I have to say, I hate to say this and bring it up, but we all remember the $700 billion bailout. A lot of Republicans ended up voting for that. And right now we're down to it. The cost is probably going to be leveling out at $130 billion. That's the bailout thing that was passed. Well, $130 billion when really all we're looking for now is $7.2 billion. And you can't say it's not there. As I said when I opened up, this president in his budget has had over $1 trillion of deficit each year for 4 years in his budget. And again, that's not the Democrats, it's not the Republicans, it's not the House, it's not the Senate. That's President Obama. That's his budget. That's the way it works. I've often said that when you look at these hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars, and yet one of the prime functions we have at roads and highways, we're just $7.2 billion short. And I think they've come up with it. I want to applaud the Finance Committee, who's been working on this and recognizing it in terms of priorities, that we ought to be able to do it. They've come up with a package now that again, this is not in my end of it. This is in the Finance Committee. A lot of people would think it's all, that the highway bill is all in the Environment and Public Works Committee. It's not. You've got the Commerce Committee, the Budget Committee, the Finance Committee, and our committee. So, but that end of it is in the Finance Committee. They've worked diligently, and I appreciate the hard work that's come from the Democrats and the Republicans on that committee. Now, in the event we don't do this, we're going to go back. It'll be our 9th extension. And when you have an extension, none of these reforms that I just now talked about, none of them will end up being done. It'll just be major cuts in programs. And I would only ask this. I would ask any member of the United States Senate, before you draw yourself into a box where you're going to be opposed to this, what you need to do is call your Oklahoma, your state departments of transportation. Talk to them about it. Talk to the chambers. Talk to the labor unions back in your state and see what they say. This is one of the few issues where they're all in agreement. And I say, you know, labor, chambers, all of them, they realize that we have to have infrastructure in America. I know that my state's not the only state that has road problems, but I'm more familiar with them because that's where I live and raise my 20 kids and grandkids. So I would hope that we look at the opportunities that we have in this what's called MAP 21. That's the Transportation Reauthorization Bill that we have under consideration at this time, and that we will take the responsible thing. If we do rely, by the way, on extensions, our Highway Trust Fund will be totally depleted by this next summer. Then you're going to have to do an extension. You're going to be forced to bail out the Highway Trust Fund. We don't want that to happen. We can preclude that from happening. All we have to do is be responsible today. Again, let me say that this is one of the few areas where back home, not just organized labor as well as business, they're all for it. And here you have extremes like Senator Boxer from California and myself. We both agree that this should be one of the two primary functions of government. This is our opportunity to do it, and I hope that there won't be people on the outside looking at this and completely disregarding these hundreds of billions of dollars that, in my opinion, have been wasted and not pay attention to one of the prime functions of government, that is doing the infrastructure for the United States of America. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor. I suggest the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
The Senate continues in the morning business until 12:30 Eastern, so it will be general speeches until then. And then at 12:30 we expect senators to recess for their weekly party lunches. They'll be back at about 2:15, and they could start debate on a bill dealing with surface transportation programs, as you heard just a couple of moments ago. We are also learning that the Senate will not be in session tomorrow. Senate Democrats are holding a midweek strategy session. The House will be in legislative business starting at noon Eastern, and they'll continue debating a bill creating a commission to find federal non-military properties that can be liquidated to save taxpayer money. Also, more work on a measure streamlining the federal budget process. General debate and amendments expected throughout the day. Voting should wrap up by 6 p.m. Eastern. Of course, you can see the House live on C-SPAN. The Associated Press and a number of sites are reporting that former Senator Bob Kerrey will not seek the Democratic nomination to replace retiring Senator Ben Nelson of Nebraska. Former Senator Kerry's announcement shuts down hopes for a bid that both parties called Democrats' best chance to hold on to the seat that former Senator Kerry himself had described as a long shot. The 1992 presidential candidate and former Nebraska governor moved to New York City after giving up his seat.
up, will I?
Yeah, you should.
And I should what?
Actually, we'll get Tim to...
What?
Tim
What
should
you
be able
say
to...
is a
Tim,
complete
you're going to give that